In Oxford, in the Ashmolean Museum, in the Gallery of the Ancient Near East, behind glass in a display case, stands a four-sided prism of baked clay, about 20 centimeters tall. Each of its four sides is covered in dense cuneiform writing, 8 columns of text on 2 of the sides, 8 more on the other 2, about 1,800 signs in total. The label under the case is short. List of the kings of Sumer, around 1822 before the Common Era. This object has its own name. It is called the Weld-Blundell Prism, after the man who donated it to the museum in 1922. Before that, it was in a private collection. Before that, it was bought from an antiquities dealer in Baghdad. Before that, it was dug up at Larsa, in the south of what is today Iraq. And almost none of the visitors to the Ashmolean know what is written on it. What is written on it is this: 80 rulers are named, the cities they ruled from are named, and the length of each reign is given. And the first 8 rulers in the list, the ones standing at the very beginning before the Great Flood, ruled for a combined total of 241,200 years. Not 100, not 1,000, 241,000. Not a myth retold orally, not a legend recorded by a poet, a list of kings, with names, with cities, with reign lengths. Clay, cuneiform, a museum in Oxford. To understand what we are actually reading, we need to start with the object itself. The Weld-Blundell Prism is not the only copy of the King List. At least 18 cuneiform copies of this text are known. They are kept in the British Museum, in the Louvre, in the Istanbul Archaeology Museum, in the Iraq National Museum, at Yale University. Most of them are fragmentary, a few lines, a broken tablet, sometimes just one side. The Oxford Prism is the most complete surviving version. That is why it became the reference. Every modern translation of the King List is based on it. It was found at Larsa in the early 20th century. The exact circumstances of the find are not documented. This was a period when antiquities dealers worked faster than archaeologists. The object reached the market and was bought in Baghdad by Herbert Weld-Blundell, an English traveler and collector. In 1922, he handed the prism over to the Ashmolean. Since then, it has stood there, in the permanent display, accessible to any visitor with a ticket.
The text on it was deciphered by Stephen Langdon, an Oxford Assyriologist. The first published translation came out in 1923. The translation has been refined several times since then, mostly on details, but the overall structure and the numbers are the ones Langdon read. And now, what the text says. The list opens with a phrase you may have seen in books on ancient history, without knowing where it came from. When kingship descended from heaven, it was at Eridu. That is the first line of the prism. After that comes the enumeration. The city of Eridu, King Alulim, reigned 28,800 years. The city of Eridu, King Alalgar, reigned 36,000 years. Then kingship moves to the city of Bad Tabira. En-Menluana reigns 43,200 years. En-Mengalana, 28,800 years. Dumuzid the shepherd, 36,000 years. Then to the city of Larak. En-Sipad Zidana, 28,800 years. Then to the city of Sipar. En-Mendirana, 21,000 years. Then to the city of Sharupak. Ubar-Tutu, 18,600 years. After Ubar-Tutu, the text says, then the flood came. 8 rulers, 241,200 years of combined reign. After the flood, the numbers drop. Not immediately, but gradually. The first post-flood king, Jushur of Kish, reigns 1,200 years. The next one, 960. By the middle of the list, the numbers come down to 1,200, to 800, to 600. By the end of the list, in the so-called Third Dynasty of Ur, reigns run to 25, 36, 48 years, normal human lifespans that match independent historical records. That is, within one and the same text, written by one and the same hand, on one and the same clay, there exist 2 fundamentally different scales of time. Before the flood, tens of thousands of years. After the flood, thousands, then hundreds, then tens. The transition is gradual.
These are not two lists from different eras. This is one document. And the person who composed this document at the start of the second millennium before the Common Era believed that between Alulim of Eridu and the kings he knew personally, several 100,000 years had passed. I want to emphasize that these numbers are not my paraphrase, not an interpretation.
This is the literal content of the clay object that stands today in the Ashmolean Museum. Any visitor can go in, look at the prism, and then at home read the translation. It has been published in open access, in several editions, available for a few dollars in any academic bookshop. Think about what that means. What we are looking at is the oldest surviving list of rulers in the world. Not a legend, not a myth, not a poem, a document. In genre, it is an administrative text, a relative of those bureaucratic clay tablets the Sumerians used to record grain deliveries, temple inventories, contracts. The same material, the same format, the same hand. And this document says that the first king of Sumer reigned 28,800 years. The standard academic explanation goes like this. The Sumerian numbers are symbolic. The long reigns are a way to convey status, antiquity, the nobility of dynasties. They are not to be taken literally. It is like once upon a time in fairy tales, an indication of indeterminate depth of the past. This is an explanation, and it has its grounds. But there are several details that it does not quite cover. And here is where things get interesting. Detail 1. If the numbers were symbolic, one would expect them to be the same or close to each other. Say, each antediluvian king reigning 30,000 years, or 40,000. Simply as a symbol for a very long time. But in the list, the numbers are all different. 28,800, 36,000, 43,200, 21,000, 18,600, which means that someone was distinguishing between them. Someone believed that Alulim reigned differently from Al-Algar and differently from En-Menluana. Detail 2. The numbers are not random. They follow a hidden mathematical structure based on the sexagesimal counting system of the Sumerians. All of the numbers divide by 60. 28,800 is 480 times 60. 36,000 is 10 times 3,600. 36,000 is 6 to the 4th power multiplied by the standard Sumerian base unit. This becomes visible as soon as you convert the numbers into their native system. The structure is there. It is simply encoded in mathematics that has been forgotten. Detail 3. When you divide the reigns by 60, that is, look at them in original Sumerian arithmetic, the numbers come out at surprisingly human lengths. Alulim, 28,800 divided by 60 gives 480. Still a lot, but no longer impossible. Divide again by 6 and you get 80. A long but realistic human reign. Al-Algar with the same divisions, 100. En-Menluana, 120. This proves nothing, but it is a hint that the numbers may have been encoded, expressed in some multiplicative unit, the key to which has been lost. This is a hypothesis that several Assyriologists treat seriously. Among them, William Hallow of Yale, Thorkild Jacobson of Harvard, Dwight Young, who published a detailed mathematical analysis of the King List numbers in the Journal of Near Eastern Studies in 1988. A real article in a real peer-reviewed journal with a real analysis. And yet even these researchers admit, we do not know what unit served as the multiplier. And we do not know whether there was a multiplier at all, or whether the numbers were written down literally and mean exactly what they say. There is one more thing worth saying, which usually gets lost in shortened summaries. Those 18 copies of the King List known to scholarship today diverge from each other, but not in the way they would diverge if the numbers were arbitrary. They diverge in names. Sometimes a ruler is spelled slightly differently. They diverge in the order of dynasties. Somewhere one stands before another, somewhere they are swapped. But the reign numbers of the antediluvian kings, across different copies, match. Not approximately, exactly. Which means that scribes separated by centuries and by cities treated the numbers as the inviolable part of the text. Names could be slightly rewritten. The order of dynasties could be shifted. But the numbers of Alulim and Al-Algar, no. Those numbers were, for them, something not to be touched.
what is usually preserved without alteration in the transmission of a text: the names of the gods, magical formulas, and numbers to which special meaning is attached. Lists of kings with arbitrary figures would not have been copied with this kind of care. And here I want to pause and address you directly. If any of you have been to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, write to me in the comments. If you stood in front of this prism, do you remember what is written on the museum label?
Are the reign numbers mentioned? Is Alulim's 28,800 years mentioned? Most of the comments I received from visitors to the Ashmolean describe the same thing: a small label, a few lines, the words underscore underscore, quote underscore, 5 underscore underscore, and nothing specific. If your experience has been different, I would like to know. And one more thing, if any of you have access to the electronic corpus of Sumerian literature, an online database developed by the University of Oxford called ETCSL, it is free. The King List is published there in full with English translation. You can read it in 20 minutes. All the numbers are there, all the names are there. It takes less time than watching a single video. Now set the arithmetic aside, because there is something else this prism is saying about itself, and it does not depend on how the numbers are interpreted. The King List is not one dynasty, not the history of one city. It is the transfer of kingship between cities: Eridu, then Bad Tabira, then Larak, then Sippar, then Shuruppak, then the flood, then again Kish, then Uruk, then then Uruk again, then again, then Awan, then Hamazi, and so on, across more than 20 dynasties, until the very end, until Isin. This is not the genealogy of one family. This is the handing over of the function of kingship between different places, as if kingship itself were an object that moves around. And in the first line of the text, that object is named kingship, that underscore underscore, quote underscore, 6 underscore underscore. I am not saying this is to be understood literally. I am saying that this is said literally, and said in a document that the same scribe filled out with grain lists and temple inventories. And one more thing, there are names in the list that we know not just from the list. Gilgamesh is the 5th king of the first dynasty of Uruk. According to the King List, he reigned 126 years. Gilgamesh is the hero of the oldest surviving work of literature in the world, the Epic of Gilgamesh, copies of which are also in the British Museum and in other collections. For a long time, it was thought that Gilgamesh was a purely mythological figure. In the 20th century, archaeologists found documents at Uruk mentioning him as a real historical person. Most Assyriologists today accept that Gilgamesh existed, ruled Uruk around the 26th century before the Common Era. 126 years is too much for a single ruler, but it is already close to the human range. And it is consistent with the multiplier hypothesis. Even if the original figure is inflated, beneath it lies a real historical individual. In other words, the King List is not entirely myth. Some of the names in it are real rulers whose existence has been confirmed by independent sources. This is not one story, it is a mixture. Real historical figures sit next to antediluvian kings whose reigns are measured in tens of thousands of years. That either means that the scribe of the second millennium before the Common Era did not himself separate myth from history, or it means that part of the quote 7 section contains real information, the key to which we have lost. The explanation through quote 8 works as long as you look at the list from a distance. Come closer, and there is too much structure in it, too much mathematics, too many names that are later confirmed, too many cities that are later found and excavated. Eridu is a real city. It was excavated by Safar and Lloyd between 1946 and 1949. Shuruppak is a real city, today known as Farah, excavated in the early 20th century. Kish, Uruk, all of these places exist. All of them have been excavated. All of them date to exactly the period the list assigns to them. Each individual detail of the King List checks out. And yet the list itself says things that nothing else confirms. Alulim, 28,800 years, kingship descending from heaven in Eridu. Compare this with other Sumerian records from the same period. When a Sumerian scribe records the quantity of barley delivered to a temple, he is accurate to the grain.
When he records the area of a field, he is accurate to the square pace. When he records the monthly wages of workers, he is accurate to the day. This was a culture with a maniacal precision in administrative work, and it is this same culture, in the same written genre, on the same clay, that records 28,800 years for the reign of the first king. Not because they were indifferent to how many years it was, but because they had a reason of some kind to record it. This is not the only Sumerian text that behaves this way. This is a pattern. In Sumerian and Akkadian literature, there are several other texts that speak about antediluvian times in a similar register. The text quote 9 is a poem about an early king of Kish who, according to the text, rises into the sky on the back of an eagle to obtain the quote. Tenatana is a real name from the King List, the 13th king of the first dynasty of Kish. His existence is confirmed by the list, and in the same poem, we see a narrative that goes beyond an ordinary royal chronicle. The text, quote 11, is a myth about the first sage who served Enki at Eridu and was summoned to the heavens to meet Anu. Sumerian literary tradition counts Adapa among the 7 antediluvian sages, the Apkallu. These 7 sages in the Sumerian and Akkadian tradition are the teachers of humanity, the ones who handed down civilization. They are depicted in fish-shaped form, like the Oannes that Berosus wrote about in the 3rd century before the Common Era. In the text, quote 12 the Babylonian poem of creation, the cosmogony involves the splitting of the body of the primal being Tiamat into heaven and earth. This happened before humans and kingship appeared. One text in particular deserves to be mentioned separately because it often gets left out of popular summaries. The so-called quote 13 This is no longer Sumerian but Egyptian. It is kept at the Museum of Egypt in Turin, Italy, under its Turin collection number, and it says the same kind of thing, a list of rulers of Egypt, beginning with gods, continuing with demigods, and the spirits of the dead, and only then moving on to historical pharaohs. The gods, according to this papyrus, also reigned over Egypt for thousands of years each, the same pattern, the same structural technique, lengths of reign that gradually shrink as the list approaches historical time. And all of this independently of the Sumerians, in another culture, in another language, in another millennium. A special place is occupied by the Sumerian text called quote 14 This is a collection of teachings that, according to the text itself, a father passes on to his son. The father's name is Shuruppak. He is the son of Ubar-Tutu. That is, this is the last antediluvian king speaking with his son, and the son in turn, Ziusudra, will be saved in the ark. So, the Instructions of Shuruppak is a speech addressed across the flood to the post-flood world. And the tone of this speech is entirely practical. Not, here is some myth, but here are the rules for how to handle debt, how to handle women, how to handle your neighbors, how to run a household. This is the oldest text in this genre in human history. It survives in several copies, the earliest of which date to the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, and its author, according to the text, is the father of the last antediluvian king in the list. And of course there is the flood myth. In the Sumerian version, a tablet from Nippur with a fragmentary text describing how the gods decide to destroy humanity, and how the king Ziusudra, the son of Ubar-Tutu, the last person who remembered antediluvian times, builds an ark and saves what is alive. Ziusudra is not mentioned on the Weld-Blundell Prism itself, but he appears in other, more fragmentary copies of the King List, and in several independent literary texts. Each of these texts on its own can be explained as literature, religious myth, a folk memory of a real event, such as a flood on the lower Euphrates. The standard explanation works, but when you see how they connect together in the King List, where the mythical Alulim sits on one line with the real Gilgamesh, and both are designated with the same word, king, it becomes clear that for the composers of this prism, the line between myth and history did not run where we draw it now. They did not know that Alulim is a symbol and Gilgamesh is reality. For them, it was one list, one continuous chain, with reign lengths gradually decreasing from tens of thousands of years down to tens, with the same cities we are still excavating today. And now the main thing. If someone composed such a document at the start of the second millennium before the Common Era, used specific numbers in it, all of them divisible by 60, tied them to specific cities, lined up 8 rulers before the flood and dozens after. Someone had a source from which they took this information. They did not invent it. They did not compose it. They did not put in whatever sounded best. They copied. What that source was, we do not know. We only know that at the moment of copying, it was considered important enough to be carved into clay and placed in an archive, and that several dozen subsequent generations of scribes copied this text another 18 times, because otherwise we would not have 18 known copies that we are comparing to each other today. One celebrated teacher does not memorize the numerical tables of his students, but 18 generations of scribes carefully copied the figures of antediluvian reigns, which means that for them, these figures meant something. I do not know what they meant.
I do not know whether there was a multiplier and what kind. I do not know whether Alulim existed as a historical person or as an image from an even older tradition. I know something else. The Weld-Blundell Prism stands in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, in the gallery of the ancient Near East, accessible to any visitor with a ticket. 18 copies of the King List have been published in museum catalogs. The ETCSL electronic corpus provides a complete English translation for free. The 6 cities mentioned in the antediluvian section, Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, Sippar, Shurupak, Kish, have all been excavated, all published, all dated to exactly the period in which the list places them. The mathematical analysis of the list numerical sequences has been published in a peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Near Eastern Studies. And yet the question of what is actually written on this prism, how it is to be interpreted, and what happened before Alulim is open. The document exists. The numbers are there. The cities exist. The copies exist. Explanations do not. The question of what the Sumerian scribes had in mind when they wrote that Alulim of Eridu reigned 28,800 years, and the question of what source stood behind this statement has been open since Stephen Langdon deciphered the prism in 1923. It is open today. Thanks for watching. And if you found this interesting, well, the King List is far from the only Sumerian text that behaves this way. Maybe I will see you in the next one.